writing, time for writing. Makes my language arts teacher brain happy. So one thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you do not mark up every mistake. You might have done this in school, maybe you didn't, but a lot of students completely ignore the teacher's feedback. And that just wastes your time in there. So you really want to make sure that you focus on 2 to 3 errors that interfere with the communicative goals. I mentioned this in the general principles, but it also applies here. Worst case scenario, they just completely shut down and disengage. And we definitely don't want that. The best case scenario is that they are very engaged, but they can't remember all the corrections. And so then that's just frustrating, and they can also get overwhelmed. So you really just want to focus your correction. You also want to use relevant models. So for example, if someone is working on writing a paper for their Penn State class, then you want to use papers from the field, or maybe you want to, they want to be able to review a restaurant that they went to. And so you can look at actual restaurant reviews, maybe on Yelp or something, I don't know. But whatever it is, you want to make sure that it's relevant to your students' goals and what they want to accomplish. Okay, so for this first apply section where we talk about skills, I am going to walk you through it step by step how I would create a template lesson based on these students' goals. And so you're going to follow along on your session 2 guide. So our 3 questions are, given the student's goal, what would work as some models? What might you guide the student to notice about the models? And then finally, what kind of activity would help them produce the target knowledge in a meaningful context? I'm going to be walking you through this with Amina, who is writing a recipe to share with a neighbor. And so this is the kind of lesson that I would maybe come up with for her goals. So first step, the model, we're going to actually look at a recipe. We're going to go through, and as she reads the ingredients and as she reads the instructions, she's going to point or mime the actions. So for cut the onion, red peppers, and bacon. So she could grab the onion, red peppers, and bacon and cut it into small pieces. And so you're still focusing on meaning, but you're also looking at an authentic example. So what might we notice about this model? Well, we notice they list the ingredients and they list the amounts. So it's not just red onions, it's 1 red onion or 50 grams of pasta per person. What else do we notice? Oh, the instructions are in the imperative. So it's not, well, I cut the onion and then I did this. No, it's cut the onion, red peppers, and bacon, heat some olive oil, add oregano, and it's in the simple present tense. It's not, oh, when I did this a week ago, I did this. I heated up the oil in the pan, those kinds of things. And you can use these technical language arts teacher terms or not. It depends on your students and your preferences. The most important part, though, is that you understand what it is and can use it, not the fancy terminology that goes with it. So these are some things that we might notice about the model recipe. So we modeled, we noticed, produce. So this is where she actually gets to write a recipe. So she writes down the ingredients, she writes down the instructions, and then she can give it to her neighbor. And this is an awesome writing lesson, if I do say so myself, and I do. So again, model, a recipe, notice, these are the things we observed, produce. This is what we actually made, what we did. All right, next skill. Reading. You might notice that spelling does not equal pronunciation. Maybe you had a similar experience to me as I did. I was reading a book, enjoyed the book, loved the book, went and told my mom, I was like, Mom, I love this book. There was this hilarious main character. And she's like, oh, what was the main character's name? And I said, Stefan. And she said, what? And I'm like, Stefan. She's like, how's it spelled? And I said, Stephen, Stefan. She's like, Steven. Spelling does not equal pronunciation, not only with names, but with a lot of words. So phonics is great sounding out words like k, at, b, at, but there are plenty that don't sound anything like how they are spelled. Try pronouncing bureaucratic by sounding it out. Doesn't work. You encounter these new words when you're reading. So how do you get students to remember this new vocabulary? Well, you want them to learn it in context. So they're learning it in a book. It's in a meaningful story, in a meaningful article, that's great. Or, you know, they're learning it through conversation with you. Whatever it is, you want them to learn it in context. Students really benefit from learning new words, like how we all learned our first languages. So no one drilled you when you were a baby and said pencil, 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 a thing you write with, P-E-N-C-I-L. No, your mom went, stop scribbling on the walls with that pencil. And you're like, oh, that's what this is. Learning things in context. Multiple modes. Students need to hear it, say it, read it, and write it. Emphasize it in whatever way is possible. Again, using all four. Even if you're focusing on vocabulary, you can still use all those other skills. And then again, noticing. So you want to encourage the use of a language log. I'm going to bring this up later as well. It really helps learners develop the practice of noticing how others use English and what they themselves have questions about. So maybe they heard a new word and then they can try and write it down, and then they come into class and they're like, I have no idea what this word means. And then you can be like, awesome, free lesson planning. I didn't have to do anything and you came in with a question for me and now we get to talk about it and it's actually useful for you. Or maybe they heard a word that they knew what it meant, or they thought they did, but it seemed to be in a completely different context with a completely different meaning. Like, oh, you're driving me crazy. What? We're not talking about cars. What do they mean, driving me crazy? So those are the kinds of things that language logs are really useful for. So sample activities for reading, again, language log. You want them to also connect to what they are reading. Say, oh yes, I've totally felt like that. It's a great way. Or say, no, I've never experienced anything like that. That sounds very strange. Those kinds of things. Predict. What do you think is going to happen next? Oh, this person is going on a plane trip to Chicago. Oh, I predict that they will be going through security. Those kinds of things. Respond. You want them to give their opinion or talk about what they think. Oh, I think that person should have driven to Chicago instead of taking a flight because flights are expensive. Those are the kinds of things that you can use to engage your students with the reading. Okay, so this is your opportunity to apply these instructions to reading. So given the student's goal, what would work as some models? What might you guide the students to notice about the models? What kind of activity would help them produce the target knowledge in a meaningful context? So Amina, she is wanting to read menus. Valentina is working on reading signage, and Lucy is trying to read text messages from English-speaking friends. So model, notice, produce. It's on your session 2 guide.
Okay, so this is our chance to kind of try out this template. So I would like us, all the groups, to focus on Amina, and the goal is being able to read menus in restaurants around State College. And so you're going to go in your group and you have about 12 minutes, so no rush. And I want you to go through these 3 questions. So first of all, what would work as instructional models? Where could you find those texts when the goal is learning how to read menus? What might you guide the student to notice about those models? And then what kind of activity would help the student produce her new knowledge in a meaningful context? So what do you guys think? Amina wants to learn how to read menus. What could we use as model texts, instructional models? And where would you find them?
Maybe the best place it will be to go to them, like because it's from Saudi Arabia, go to some restaurant, they have halal food, stuff like that, and start with something is more familiar for her. That would be, I
And
think.
read like an Saudi menu in English? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, there is because there is some store and there is like some restaurant you can go there and just because you can start from something that's familiar for her and
Yeah,
then
I like
go
that idea.
yeah
I like that
step
idea.
by step.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Start where they are and then move them towards McDonald's.
Yep.
Very different. Okay. Other ideas for model text?
Yeah, I would just find out what kind of restaurant they want to go to or where they like to go,
Mhm.
and go from there. Because almost all restaurants, whether they're local or chains, you can get their full menus online. So
Right.
yeah, you could pull all the information you needed, and print it out or just look at it together.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So yeah, start with something familiar. Start with something a restaurant that they like or we know they want to be able to order food from. And then also maybe bring in something they never thought of too, right? Because we want to introduce them to brand new things eventually as well, very unfamiliar things. Okay, any other thoughts on instructional models?
I think the instructional model it will be a kind of like a storytelling, and maybe you can find something in internet and some like a textbook about cooking because I know there is a lot of textbook about culinary
Yes.
textbook. We can use that, and that's something also
Yep.
that would be helpful.
That's another way. Look at the textbooks, and we have a lot of ESL textbooks that have menus in them, I assure you. So all of those are good ideas. What do you think about like in Julia's example, she brought in one menu to look at. What are the advantages, disadvantages of looking at one? I mean, that was a recipe. We're talking about menus. Advantages, disadvantages of looking at one menu at a time versus having two or three.
Somebody when they want to start learning, they will be start at one place, not just like bombarding people and just putting a lot of stuff on her plate on his plate. It will be kind of confusing and they feel more frustration. I have a lot to learn, but we should know everything. Start by the first step. And the first step, it will be something so easy and just ball rolling,
Yep. And then build up some more.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think it could get overwhelming to have too many things to look at. And especially if they're looking at, say, a non-American origin or English origin cuisine that's been translated into English. Things aren't always transliterated the same. Like General Tso's chicken is not always spelled the same. It's not always spelled TSO. So that might be really confusing if they see it spelled like 3 different ways on 3 different Chinese menus.
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with you. Like start small and then as they're learning more, you can expand. Maybe eventually you get to comparing different menus and the different elements. How are the different elements of menus appearing on different menus? What are the similarities? What are the differences? So let's move to this. What would you guide the student to notice about? Let's start with one menu. What would you guide the student to notice about it?
How menus are broken down into categories.
Like what kind of categories would you expect
In
an American restaurant?
Starters / appetizers.
Mhm, mhm.
Sometimes there's salad, sometimes there's not.
Or soup and
Um,
salad. Mhm,
yeah, soup and salad, um, entrees.
mhm.
Um, Having just come back from Europe not that long ago, I noticed a lot of the menus there are divided by like type of meat that it is, and like Chinese restaurants are that way all the time, but ours are usually just main courses,
Mhm,
and everything is just like thrown together.
mhm,
Um, so that might be really different for an ESL student.
mhm,
And then desserts.
mhm.
Yeah.
Beverages maybe. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that is a great place to start is what are the categories on a menu, and maybe talk to them about, well, what about in your country? Do you have those same categories usually or not? And that'll be interesting. What else would, oh, and along with the categories, there's obviously really important vocabulary. Learning those actual words, and in some cases, different words for the same kind of thing, like starter and appetizer. So some good vocabulary there, as well as cultural knowledge about how we think of eating and ordering a meal. What else would you want to draw their attention to? Help them notice.
One thing that we maybe she like to notice about the Amina, for our example, sometimes how to eat some kind of food. It is a big challenge for people, from other culture, and they like to learn this kind of stuff,
Can you give an example?
beverage, because there is looking for something halal or maybe something like that. Yes, and our example in other country, people from Mexico, they want to know something kind of food, different, like a procedure here, different, like a way to eat something. It is a challenging, and
Yeah,
if you be able to like convey this kind of information with some vocabulary, that will be helpful. It's
yeah,
about that you indirectly try to teach him about something is important for her.
yes, yes. I mean, right here, the focus is on reading the menu, but you can see how this would easily bridge to also speaking activities and actually ordering food and things like that, and responding to what the waitress or waiter says to you. So it would, that's a great way to bring in all four, is bring it into a, speaking lesson as well. But
Another thing,
yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
another example I like to mention here is, you want to go to the like a Starbucks, you want to go to the like a Panera and whatever you want to go, whenever you want to go. Sometimes they have a problem even for ordering, because everything is kind of online and there is lots of option there. They know how what they want to start, and this is why sometimes you can help even with that. It'll be a good place also for learning, because she find it is applicable for her life, and this is another thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I grew up in State College, and I still go places and I have no idea how to order food on a regular basis. Like there's just so many different ways now, depending
Yeah.
on the place.
Yeah, I feel
So
Yeah.
maybe you would talk about that ahead of time, and then again, maybe give her a homework assignment to go with her friend or her family and see how it goes, and then come back and talk about it. Or even you might go with her, as one of your tutoring sessions, depending on lots of things. What were you going to say, Angela?
Um, about the ordering online, like when I'm out and about and like there's a Starbucks that doesn't take order ahead, I'm like, oh crap, I have to actually talk to somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I have
And
no
some
idea
people,
how to order my drink vocally
yeah,
because I always just punch it in.
it's amazing how complicated life is now.
Yeah,
And then you have other people who are very intimidated by the online or the screen ordering. They only want
yeah,
to talk to someone. So
yeah.
it's all out there now. But like
Um,
Chipotle and those kind of places, I mean,
yeah.
you can study for 5 weeks to go to Chipotle.
But it it might also be like Amina might really be interested in reading menus because like she's a vegetarian and she needs to know how to ask questions.
Yes,
Um, so maybe we want to find out what our students' dietary restrictions are and like what specific vocabulary they need to know when they're
great
going
idea.
to a restaurant.
Great idea. And how can think of another way that we can help her notice from the menu what might be appropriate for her.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of menus have a symbol now, like
Oh yeah, the little leaf
gluten
and
free or
yeah.
spicy, or you know, so that's another thing we want to help her notice.
Yeah. Yeah, American restaurants have a lot of little asterisks and yeah.
Yeah,
I'll
and,
get
and
that.
challenge, and also, right now about the content of calorie, how much calorie, and that
Right.
that's something.
Right. Anything else we want to help her notice before we move on?
There's some people like maybe they have some like a cultural issue, like as I said, halal food stuff like that, and maybe she like to know how to communicate that, like a restriction, like this kind of work. This is why I think it is another thing. Maybe she can, it can help us to be in the same boat with her and also empathy with her. This is something I feel like
It
it's
goes back to the overarching theme is get to know your student, get to know what's important to her or him, and make sure you integrate that in your lesson. All right, let's move on to the third part of the template, produce. So you're doing all this analysis of menus together, but then you want to give her a chance to produce something, either in writing or through speaking. What ideas do you have for that? How can she produce what she's learned in a new creative way?
You can role play a dinner order with her, or even have her just like create an ideal menu of her own. Yeah.
I think creating the menu would be the easier thing.
Yeah.
Based on what we've talked about, because when you go to ordering, then there's a whole bunch of other things you need to discuss, like expressions for ordering, politeness, grammar for ordering, right? So I would start with somehow having her create a menu. So let's think about that even a little bit more. Like what guidance? There are many different ways you could do it. What kind of guidance could you come up with to have her create a menu?
See if she wants to create a menu of her own culture cuisine. Or
like maybe one of her favorite restaurants from home.
Yeah.
Make it following American norms and using English.
Yeah.
Like that idea. So any other thoughts about how to have her create a menu besides that one?
Yeah, I think the good thing it will be like asking produce a menu and also presenting it as like a 3 minutes, something like that, and practicing with her.
Okay, our group is just wrapping up our discussion about how we would have the student produce something with her new knowledge that she's learned. Do any of the other groups, did you have good ideas about how to encourage the student to produce that you want to share with everyone? What did you talk about?
He had ideas of getting menus from restaurants and going over them together, or actually having sessions in restaurants.
So we were talking as well about looking at a bunch of different menus from places around State College and noticing the different categories on menus, the vocabulary related to that, noticing symbols for things like vegetarian and spicy and things like that. And then we were talking about, okay, but how will we have her produce something after all this noticing and analysis? And we were talking about maybe have her write a menu, maybe create a menu from her memory of one of her favorite restaurants in her home country, but write it according to American norms, more American norms and American English vocabulary. Any other ideas about how to have her produce something, either in writing or through speaking, related to what she learned about menus?
Well, we talked about having her make a menu for home use, make a menu for breakfast, make menus for lunch, make menus for dinner, have her, make them up, help her.
I think about that. I think that's a great idea. Like make a menu of those different meals of things that she makes and she's familiar with, maybe things she makes for her own family, and turn it into a menu and put costs and symbols and all those kinds of things. That's a neat idea. All right, I think we better go back to the video now and we'll keep learning.